the sudden death of Uther Pendragon plunged the entire kingdom of Britain into chaos. Without its strong leader, the kingdom quickly became embroiled in internal strife. The nobles fiercely contested the issue of succession to the throne, each vying for power. Some sought to enthrone distant relatives of Uther, while others aimed to crown themselves or their offspring as king. In this fierce struggle, bribery, threats, and even assassination attempts became common. Amid this turmoil, the wizard Merlin faced a crucial decision. Through prophecy, he had learned that Uther's newborn son, Arthur, was destined to be the king who would save Britain. However, Merlin knew that Arthur could not yet be crowned. The child had to be hidden and protected from those who sought his life until he was ready to claim his rightful place as king. On a stormy night, Merlin moved baby Arthur to a safe place. He sought out Sir Ector, a noble and loyal knight. Arriving at Ector's castle, Merlin revealed Arthur's true identity in secret and asked Ector to raise him as an ordinary child. Though Sir Ector hesitated, he eventually agreed to take on this great responsibility. Meanwhile, Britain fell into even greater peril. Internal conflicts opened the way for invasions from external forces. In the north, the Picts from Scotland crossed the border and raided villages. On the eastern coast, Saxon ships relentlessly arrived. In the south, the Franks began eyeing Britain's territories. Amid this growing chaos, the people of Britain suffered. Famine and disease were rampant, and bandits roamed the countryside. The people lived in fear and despair, yearning for new hope. They prayed for a legendary hero to appear and bring an end to this dark age. The fate of Britain now rested on the shoulders of a young boy. Arthur grew up in Sir Ector's castle, unaware of his true identity. Raised alongside Ector's son Kay, Arthur received basic training and education for knighthood. He diligently served as a squire, learning swordsmanship, chivalry, and the manners of the nobility as he matured. Arthur's days were filled with hard work and discipline. He rose early each morning to tend the castle's horses and polish the knight's armor. In the mornings, he trained in swordsmanship with Kay, and in the afternoons, he studied Latin, history, and the scriptures. In the evenings, he listened to the conversations of the noblemen at Ector's table, absorbing knowledge about the world. One day, the wizard Merlin visited Sir Ector's castle. It was during this visit that Arthur and Merlin first met. Merlin saw special light in Arthur's eyes and sensed the greatness within him. He approached Arthur and began a conversation, offering cryptic hints about the boy's future destiny, though Arthur could not fully grasp their meaning. "You carry great power within you," Merlin told Arthur. "One day, that power will awaken, and you will change the fate of many." Though Arthur pondered these words, he ultimately regarded them as no more than the encouragement of a well-meaning adult. As time passed, Arthur began to realize his own abilities and courage. He displayed remarkable skill compared to the other squires, often showing extraordinary judgment and bravery in times of crisis. On one occasion, while hunting, he fearlessly rescued a child from a charging bear without a moment's hesitation. Despite his talents, Arthur continued to believe he was simply the son of a knight. He dreamed of becoming a noble knight who would serve Britain honorably. He had no knowledge of his special destiny as he continued to grow into a strong and wise young man. In London, a great tournament was held. Knights from across Britain gathered to showcase their skills and win glory. Nobles, knights, and spectators flocked to the city from every corner of the kingdom. Arthur accompanied Kay to the tournament as his squire. The tournament grounds were full of life and excitement. Knights in gleaming armor, colorful banners, and the elegant dresses of noble women created a spectacular scene. Arthur was dazzled by it all, dreaming that one day he too might be among the knights competing for honor. On the first day of the tournament, just before Kay's match, he realized he had forgotten his sword. Panicked, Kay ordered Arthur to fetch it. Arthur hurried back to their quarters, but found the door locked. Desperate to find a sword for Kay, Arthur searched around. By chance, Arthur came across a mysterious sword lodged in a stone in the courtyard of a nearby church. It was the legendary Excalibur. Inscribed on the stone were the words, "Whosoever pulls this sword from the stone shall be the rightful king of Britain." Many knights had tried and failed to pull the sword free, and rumors of its mystical power had spread far and wide. Arthur, focused only on finding a sword for Kay, paid little attention to the inscription. Without thinking, he grasped the hilt and pulled. To everyone's astonishment, the sword slid easily from the stone, as though drawn from water. The onlookers were stunned into silence. For a moment, the entire courtyard fell quiet, with all eyes on Arthur. Then, someone cried out, "The king has come!" And soon the whole tournament grounds echoed with the news. Word of the event spread like wildfire. Soon, everyone knew that Arthur had drawn Excalibur from the stone. The knights and nobles were astonished, unsure whether to be skeptical or in awe. Many believed it was a sign from the heavens, confirming that Arthur was the rightful king of Britain. Arthur himself was confused by the extraordinary event. He did not fully understand the significance of what he had done, but he felt that something momentous was beginning. His ordinary life was now over, and a new destiny awaited him. With Excalibur in hand, Arthur was hailed by many as the new king of Britain. The people saw him as their savior and greeted him with overwhelming enthusiasm. They believed Arthur would end the long years of chaos and usher in an era of peace and prosperity. However, not everyone accepted Arthur's claim to the throne. Some powerful nobles opposed him, citing his youth and lack of experience as reasons to reject his kingship. They claimed that Arthur had only drawn the sword by chance and lacked the ability to rule. Some even publicly declared their opposition and plotted to overthrow him by force. Arthur soon faced his first trial as king. He had to prove his legitimacy and quell the forces against him. During this difficult time, Merlin became his most trusted advisor. Merlin taught Arthur the qualities of kingship, providing him with wise political counsel. A battle with the opposing nobles became inevitable. Drawing on Merlin's advice and his own innate wisdom, Arthur devised a strategy. He rallied the knights and nobles who supported him and worked to gain the trust of the common people. In battle, Arthur displayed remarkable courage and leadership. Fighting at the front lines, he inspired his soldiers to fight with greater fervor. His bravery turned the tide of battle, and in a decisive moment, Arthur found himself facing the enemy leader. After a fierce one-on-one duel, Arthur emerged victorious, and the battle was won. Arthur's victory solidified his reputation. Many knights and nobles who had doubted him now acknowledged his ability and sided with him. They realized that Arthur was not merely a lucky boy, but a true king. Among the common folk, Arthur became a symbol of hope. His courage, wisdom, and care for his people won their hearts. After the battle, Arthur showed mercy by forgiving his enemies, further strengthening his support among the populace. Gradually, the chaos in the kingdom began to subside. Arthur set about restoring order, reforming the law, and lightening the tax burden on the people. He also fortified the kingdom's borders to fend off invaders. Under Arthur's rule, Britain began to move towards a new era. The people believed that the long years of suffering were ending, and a time of peace and prosperity was on the horizon. Arthur, now a true king, was ready to face the challenges and trials that lay ahead. At last, Arthur's official coronation was held. In London's Grand Cathedral, nobles, knights, and a vast crowd of commoners gathered to witness the event. The atmosphere inside and outside the cathedral was one of joyous celebration, as the people welcomed their new king with open arms. The coronation was a solemn and majestic affair. Merlin presided over the ceremony, placing the crown on Arthur's head. As the crown settled, the cathedral echoed with cries of "Long live the king!" Overwhelmed with emotion, and a deep sense of responsibility, Arthur took his place on the throne. Excalibur, the symbol of Arthur's legitimacy, was displayed for all to see. The knights came forward one by one to swear their loyalty to Arthur, and the nobles recognized him as the rightful king of Britain. After the ceremony, Arthur emerged from the cathedral to greet the waiting crowds. The cheers were deafening, and many shed tears of joy. Following the coronation, Arthur made an important announcement. He declared the founding of the Knights of the Round Table, a group dedicated to uniting the kingdom and upholding justice. He explained that the Round Table would symbolize equality among all knights and that they would work together to bring peace and prosperity to Britain. "We are entering a new era," Arthur proclaimed. "The Knights of the Round Table will protect the weak, uphold justice, and dedicate themselves to the glory of Britain. Together, we will make this kingdom the greatest in the world." Arthur's declaration resonated deeply. Many knights volunteered to join the Round Table, and Arthur selected the bravest and noblest among them: Lancelot, Gawain, Percival, and others who would later become legends, gathered by Arthur's side. Under Arthur's reign, the Kingdom of Britain embarked on a new chapter. The people believed that the era of chaos and war was ending, and a time of peace and prosperity was about to begin. Camelot, the symbol of the ideal kingdom, was built, and there Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table laid out their grand plans for Britain's future. But despite these beginnings, Arthur and his knights still faced many challenges and trials. External threats lingered, internal conflicts remained unresolved, and dark forces continued to seek Arthur's downfall. Thus, the legend of King Arthur was just beginning. A tale of glory and tragedy, love and betrayal, and the ideals and realities of chivalry would unfold in the story of Camelot. After King Arthur's coronation, his first major project was the construction of a new capital, Camelot. Arthur wanted to embody his vision of an ideal kingdom through this city. He gathered the best architects and craftsmen to plan the city, which was designed to be a beautiful place surrounded by majestic walls. Arthur was personally involved in the design of the city, ensuring it would be a place where people of all classes could live in equality. The city featured vast squares and parks to enhance the quality of life for the citizens, and large libraries and schools made it a center of education and learning. Camelot Castle stood tall at the heart of the city, a symbol of awe-inspiring grandeur and beauty. The construction of Camelot took several years. Arthur frequently visited the construction sites, inspecting the progress and encouraging the workers. His hands-on approach earned him the respect of the people, and many citizens volunteered to contribute to the building efforts. Through Camelot, Arthur also experimented with a new system of governance. He established a citizens' council, striving to hear the voices of the people and reflect their concerns in his policies. This was an innovative approach for the time and won the support of many. Additionally, he set up an independent court system to guarantee fair trials for all citizens. The Knights of the Round Table, under Arthur's leadership, took on the mission of protecting justice and peace. They traveled across Britain, defending the weak and defeating evil. Knights like Lancelot, Gawain, and Percival gained renown for their heroic deeds, becoming legends in their own right. Their tales were sung by bards and spread throughout the land. Camelot became a symbol of an ideal kingdom. The city was a hub for art and learning, attracting scholars and artists from across Europe. Arthur established a fair legal system, providing equal opportunities for all citizens. Commerce thrived, and agriculture flourished, leading to an ever-growing prosperity for the people. The prosperity of Camelot also fostered the growth of arts and culture. Bards and artists from all over the kingdom gathered to create a vibrant cultural scene. and Camelot soon became the center of artistic innovation. Murals and sculptures depicting the adventures of the Knights of the Round Table adorned the city, inspiring its citizens. However, beneath this prosperity lay dark shadows. Some nobles remained dissatisfied with Arthur's rule, and external threats still loomed. Arthur and his knights had to constantly work to defend the peace and stability of Camelot. A turning point in King Arthur's life came with his meeting of Guinevere. The daughter of King Leodegrance, Guinevere was renowned for her beauty and wisdom. Arthur initially sought to meet her for a political alliance, but upon their first encounter, he was deeply struck by love. Their romance quickly blossomed. Arthur proposed to Guinevere, and she gladly accepted. The news of their marriage spread across the kingdom, bringing great joy. The wedding was held in Camelot with grand celebration, and the people rejoiced, believing that this union would bring further stability and prosperity to the kingdom. Arthur and Guinevere's marriage was not just a romantic affair, but a significant political alliance. The union with Leodegrance's kingdom bolstered the security of Britain. Additionally, this marriage encouraged other small kingdoms to recognize Arthur's reign and join the united Britain. Guinevere established herself as a remarkable queen. Her wisdom and compassion earned her the love of the people. She became one of Arthur's key advisors, playing an essential role in the governance of the kingdom, particularly in diplomacy. Her efforts improved relationships with neighboring nations. After the marriage, Guinevere's influence in diplomacy grew even further. Her charm and intelligence won over foreign emissaries, leading to favorable treaties. She also championed the rights of women and children, pushing for policies that enhanced their well-being. However, as time passed, tensions began to surface both within and outside the kingdom. Some conservative nobles disapproved of Guinevere's deep involvement in politics, and the lack of an heir began to raise concerns about the future of the kingdom. Over time, subtle tensions also began to arise between Arthur and Guinevere. While they loved each other, they had differing views on governance. Arthur was focused on building his ideal kingdom, while Guinevere took a more pragmatic approach. These differences often led to conflicts during decision-making. Complicating matters further was the growing bond between Guinevere and Lancelot. Though both tried to suppress their feelings, those around them began to sense something between them. This hidden relationship would eventually bring great tragedy to Camelot. At the height of his reign, King Arthur issued a new challenge to the Knights of the Round Table: the quest for the Holy Grail. The Grail, believed to be the cup Jesus used at the Last Supper, was said to bring divine blessing and wisdom to those who found it. Arthur believed that this quest was necessary for the spiritual growth of his knights and the continued prosperity of the kingdom. He gathered the knights and declared, "We have achieved much worldly glory, but now we must seek a higher purpose. Let us find the Grail and bring its divine light to our kingdom." The knights enthusiastically accepted this mission. Galahad, Percival, Bors, and Lancelot were among the many who set out on the quest, each taking different paths to explore Britain and distant lands. Along the way, they encountered many adventures and trials. The quest for the Grail was as much a spiritual and psychological challenge as it was a physical one. Many knights were led astray by illusions and temptations, while others were driven to madness. The quest revealed the inner conflicts and true character of each knight. Galahad, with his pure heart and noble spirit, overcame many hardships. Percival, after many failures, learned the importance of humility and compassion. Lancelot, burdened by guilt and inner turmoil, ultimately failed to find the Grail, but gained self-awareness along the way. During the quest, the knights had mystical experiences. Some spoke with divine beings, while others received prophecies of the future. These experiences deeply changed their outlook on life, and those who returned to Camelot were no longer the same. The quest tested the bonds between the knights. Some competed and clashed, while others lost their lives in the pursuit of the Grail. This quest highlighted the gap between the ideals of Camelot and the harsh realities they faced. In the end, it was said that only Galahad, Percival, and Bors succeeded in finding the Grail, but they soon left the earthly realm to join the divine. This event profoundly impacted the knights and changed the atmosphere in Camelot. Though the quest had ended, its effects lingered long after. Camelot shifted from focusing solely on material prosperity to also valuing spiritual growth. Yet, this also revealed the risks of chasing ideals and losing touch with reality. Arthur now faced the challenge of balancing spiritual values with practical needs. Lancelot du Lac became known as the greatest of King Arthur's knights of the Round Table. With unmatched skill in combat and noble character, he earned the respect of all. Lancelot won countless battles and adventures, building a reputation that spread far and wide. Lancelot's loyalty to Arthur was unwavering. He always stood by the king's side, dedicating himself to the kingdom. His exploits became legendary, and he was admired as the perfect knight by all who heard of him. Many young men dreamed of following in his footsteps. Lancelot's talents were not limited to combat. He also excelled in diplomacy and politics. On numerous occasions, he successfully negotiated with neighboring nations on Arthur's behalf and played a key role in resolving internal conflicts. His versatility made him Arthur's right-hand man. However, Lancelot's life took a dramatic turn when he and Queen Guinevere developed deep feelings for each other. They initially tried to suppress their emotions, but over time, their love only grew stronger. Lancelot and Guinevere met in secret. Although they knew their actions were wrong, they could not deny their feelings for each other. Rumors about their relationship began to spread, eventually leading to a major rift within the kingdom. Arthur, for a long time, refused to believe the rumors. He trusted Lancelot as his most loyal knight and loved Guinevere deeply. But as evidence mounted, Arthur could no longer ignore the truth. As Lancelot's fame grew, so did jealousy and suspicion among some of the knights and nobles. Arthur's nephew, Gawain, in particular, began to see Lancelot as a rival. This tension would later contribute to the growing divisions within Camelot. When Lancelot and Guinevere's relationship was finally exposed, Arthur was plunged into deep despair. He knew that the law required him to punish them, but his love for both made it difficult. This situation starkly revealed the conflict between Arthur's image as a just king and his human emotions. This love triangle shook Camelot to its core. The knights divided into factions, with some supporting Lancelot and others condemning him. The nobles and the people were also divided, and the once strong Round Table began to show signs of internal fracture. Lancelot and Guinevere's affair ultimately accelerated the downfall of Camelot. It became more than just a personal tragedy, but the beginning of the end for an era of idealism. During Arthur's reign, Britain faced constant external threats, the most significant being the invasions of the Saxons. Several times, the Saxons led large armies to attack Britain, seeking to conquer its rich lands. Arthur met these threats with outstanding strategy and leadership. He built a powerful defense system around the Knights of the Round Table and defeated the Saxons in several key battles. The victory at the Battle of Mount Badon, in particular, elevated Arthur's reputation and secured Britain's safety for many years. In dealing with these external threats, Arthur developed innovative military strategies. He moved away from traditional infantry tactics, introducing a cavalry-based approach that greatly improved the mobility and striking power of the British Army, helping them overcome numerical disadvantages. Yet, the Saxons were not the only threat. The Picts from the north, the Scots from Ireland, and various continental powers also posed dangers. Arthur and his knights defended the kingdom against all these threats, protecting its borders. Arthur also worked to reduce these threats through diplomacy. He negotiated peace treaties with several hostile forces and, at times, used political marriages to strengthen alliances. These efforts helped maintain peace in Britain, though some criticized Arthur for being too lenient. Meanwhile, Arthur's half-sister, Morgana, became a major internal threat. Morgana was a powerful sorceress with ambitions to overthrow Arthur and take the throne. She orchestrated various schemes to weaken Arthur. At one point, she attempted to steal his magical sword, Excalibur, and at another, she tried to plunge the kingdom into chaos through her son, Mordred, born of her union with Arthur. The conflict between Arthur and Morgana intensified over time. Their battle transcended a mere power struggle and became a battle over the fate of Britain. Merlin warned Arthur about Morgana's danger, but Arthur's love for his sister kept him from fully opposing her. The rivalry between Arthur and Morgana became a clash between magic and science. While Morgana used dark sorcery to threaten the kingdom, Arthur and Merlin responded with rational and scientific approaches. This fostered the development of science and technology in Camelot, laying the groundwork for the future Renaissance. These external threats gradually drained Camelot's strength. The kingdom's resources were depleted by constant warfare, and the people grew weary. Although Arthur and his knights managed to fend off most threats, these victories came at great cost. Moreover, in focusing on external threats, Arthur neglected growing internal problems. The division among nobles, the increasing gap between rich and poor, and growing discord among the Knights of the Round Table all began to fester. Though the kingdom had successfully defended against external threats, internal conflicts deepened, signaling that Camelot's golden age was slowly coming to an end. Arthur and his knights now faced the dual challenge of confronting both external enemies and internal fractures. The peace and prosperity of Camelot did not last long. The secret affair between Lancelot and Guinevere was finally exposed, throwing the kingdom into turmoil. This revelation struck Camelot like a storm, and the once solid Knights of the Round Table were quickly divided. King Arthur was devastated by the betrayal. The treachery of the two people he trusted and loved most left him deeply wounded. Although Arthur wanted to punish Guinevere according to the law, Lancelot rescued her, escaping with her and worsening the situation. The Knights of the Round Table chose different paths based on their loyalties. Some remained loyal to Arthur, while others followed Lancelot. Sir Gawain and others vowed revenge on Lancelot, pursuing him. This event was not just a personal tragedy, but the beginning of a kingdom-wide fracture. Nobles and commoners alike were divided in their opinions. Some supported Arthur's sense of justice, while others sympathized with Lancelot and Guinevere. Conflicts began to erupt, both within and outside the kingdom. The unrest that had been simmering beneath the surface began to emerge. Rebellions loomed in some regions, and external forces saw an opportunity in the kingdom's instability. Arthur's authority began to weaken. Though he remained the King of Britain, he no longer commanded the same respect and loyalty as before. The ideals of Camelot were crumbling against the harsh realities of life. During this period, Arthur was filled with deep anguish. He watched helplessly as his dream of an ideal kingdom fell apart. Merlin had long disappeared, leaving Arthur to face this crisis alone. The collapse of Camelot was not just the fall of a kingdom, but the end of an era. The ideals of knighthood, the dream of justice and equality, and the hope for a peaceful world were all crumbling together. Everything Arthur and his knights had worked so hard to build seemed to be falling apart in an instant. Arthur's internal conflict deepened during this time. He was torn between his duties as a king and his emotions as a man. On one hand, he felt the responsibility to uphold the law and justice, and on the other, he felt compassion and love for those closest to him. This inner turmoil made his decisions even more difficult. After Lancelot and Guinevere's escape, the atmosphere in Camelot grew increasingly gloomy. Distrust and suspicion filled the air. The knights grew wary of one another, and the nobles began to move for their own gain. The once symbolic Round Table, a beacon of unity and ideals, was left to gather dust. Arthur made desperate efforts to reunite his kingdom. He traveled across Britain, meeting with the people and trying to calm the unrest. However, the seeds of mistrust that had been sown were not easily uprooted. During this time, unexpected natural disasters and disease struck Britain. Famine and plague spread, worsening the people's suffering. Some saw this as divine punishment, and voices questioning Arthur's reign grew louder. External forces also began to exploit the kingdom's turmoil. The Saxons and the Picts once again threatened the borders, and small-scale invasions had already begun in some areas. Arthur now faced the challenge of dealing with both internal and external crises. Despite all this, Arthur tried not to lose hope. He acknowledged his mistakes and sought to become a better king. Alongside his remaining loyal knights, he began making plans to rebuild Camelot, embarking on one last effort to restore the kingdom. As Camelot struggled with internal conflicts, Mordred, Arthur's hidden son, emerged. He revealed that he was the child of Arthur and Morgana, and he openly declared his claim to the throne, leading a rebellion. Mordred had long been preparing for this moment. He knew Arthur's weaknesses well and skillfully exploited the growing dissatisfaction within Camelot. His claim garnered significant support, especially among nobles who had grievances against Arthur's rule. Mordred's forces quickly expanded, taking control of various regions and splitting the kingdom in two. Once peaceful Britain was now plunged into the chaos of civil war. Arthur made desperate attempts to prevent the situation from escalating. He sought to negotiate with Mordred, but Mordred refused any reconciliation. Arthur had no choice but to prepare for battle to defend his kingdom. Arthur's emotions were conflicted during this time. Mordred was his son, but he was also a threat to his kingdom. Arthur found himself torn between his feelings as a father and his duties as a king. Mordred proved to be a cunning strategist. He knew how to exploit Arthur's vulnerabilities and use psychological warfare to undermine him. He exposed Arthur's past mistakes, questioning his legitimacy as king. The conflict between Arthur and Mordred was not just a struggle for power, it was a clash of ideologies. Arthur had pursued ideals of knighthood and just governance, while Mordred sought power for power's sake. It was a battle for the future of Britain. This conflict led to the kingdom's complete destruction. The war ravaged the land, and the people suffered greatly. Once a symbol of peace and prosperity, Camelot now lay in ruins. Mordred's rebellion revealed the fundamental weaknesses of Arthur's kingdom. It exposed the gap between ideals and reality and the darker side of human nature. Arthur's dream had been noble, but reality was far harsher. Mordred's existence also brought to light Arthur's past sins. His presence reminded everyone of Arthur's affair with his half-sister, Morgana, which tarnished Arthur's moral authority. Many began to question Arthur's actions, further weakening his rule. Mordred and Morgana worked closely together. Morgana's magic and Mordred's strategies combined to push Arthur's forces to the brink of collapse. They used illusions and deception to confuse Arthur's army, turning the tide of the war. The people of Britain were divided. Some still supported Arthur, but others were drawn to Mordred's vision of a new future. Mordred promised to overthrow the old feudal order and build a new society, gaining widespread support. As the war dragged on, Britain's resources were exhausted. Farmlands were devastated, and young men were conscripted to the battlefield. Famine and disease swept through the country, adding to the toll on both sides. The prolonged war wore down the entire nation. During this time, the absence of Lancelot was a significant blow to Arthur. Without his greatest knight and most trusted friend, Arthur grew increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Some longed for Lancelot's return, but he remained out of sight. Mordred also waged a psychological war, stoking the flames of discontent among those who had suffered under Arthur's reign. He promised a new order, drawing even more supporters to his cause. His speeches captivated many and further weakened Arthur's base of support. As the war continued, Arthur took time to reflect on his reign. He began to realize where his idealism had clashed with reality and where he had failed to meet the needs of his people. This self-reflection, though painful, ultimately made Arthur a wiser leader. Mordred's rebellion also had broader implications beyond Britain. Some foreign powers saw the chaos as an opportunity to invade, while others weighed which side to support. The Civil War added a new layer of complexity to international politics. Mordred's rebellion ignited a full-scale civil war across Britain. Camelot was divided into two factions, and war broke out. Once brotherly knights of the Round Table now drew their swords against each other. On Arthur's side were loyal knights like Gawain, Bedivere, and Kay. They stood by Arthur's ideals to the end. On Mordred's side were Agravain and Mordred's followers, along with many disgruntled nobles. The war was devastating. Once peaceful villages were set ablaze, and farmland was left barren. The common people suffered greatly between the two warring factions. Many lost their lives or their homes, and famine and disease spread across the land. During this crisis, Arthur sought Merlin's final counsel, but Merlin had long vanished. Instead, Arthur turned to the Lady of the Lake for guidance. She reminded Arthur of Excalibur's true power and advised him to prepare for the final battle. After much inner struggle, Arthur made his final decision. He would confront Mordred in one last battle to end the war. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was the only way to stop further devastation. As the Civil War dragged on, the glory of Camelot faded. The once grand palace was now shrouded in an air of desolation. The Round Table, once a symbol of unity and ideals, was left to gather dust. The laughter of knights had long vanished. During this time, Lancelot's whereabouts remained unknown. Some said he had embarked on a path of penance, while others believed he had gone into hiding. His absence was a severe blow to Arthur. The war was not merely a struggle for territorial power. It was a battle between ideals and reality, dreams and harsh truths. Arthur's ideal kingdom was being dismantled by the limitations of human nature and reality. Before the final battle, Arthur spent time in deep reflection. He looked back on his reign and considered where things had gone wrong. In the end, he accepted his fate. The common people played a crucial role in the Civil War. In some towns and cities, autonomous governments were established, declaring independence. They rejected both Arthur and Mordred, experimenting with new forms of governance, further complicating Britain's political landscape. As the war dragged on, women also took on new roles. Many joined the front lines or played crucial roles behind the scenes, challenging traditional gender roles and changing societal perceptions. Religious tensions also escalated. The conflict between Christianity and the old Celtic faith became more pronounced, adding another layer of complexity to the war. Some clergy interpreted the war as a holy crusade. The arts and culture also transformed during the war. New forms of poetry and song emerged, depicting the horrors of the conflict. Heroic epics were now tinged with tragedy and a more realistic perspective. Ultimately, the Civil War raised fundamental questions about Britain's identity. People began to reflect on what true Britain meant and what direction they should take in the future. These questions would deeply influence Britain's history in the years to come. The Battle of Camlan, the most tragic battle in Britain's history, began. On the plains of Camlan, Arthur's army and Mordred's forces clashed. This battle was more than just a war. It signaled the end of an era. The battle began at dawn. In the mist-covered field, the two armies collided, quickly descending into a bloody slaughter. Knights who had once been like brothers now swung their swords at one another. Arthur fought in the heart of the battlefield. His courage remained undiminished, and Excalibur shone brightly, cutting through his enemies. But his eyes were filled with sorrow as he fought against those he once loved. Mordred was a formidable warrior as well. Consumed by hatred for his father and his ambition for the throne, he fought with fierce skill. His army fought with a fervor born of desperation. The battle raged on throughout the day. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. The field was littered with corpses, and the river ran red with blood. Knights of the Round Table fell one by one. Gawain was mortally wounded in a duel with Mordred. As the sun began to set, the tide of battle seemed to turn in Arthur's favor. But then, an unexpected event occurred. A soldier on one side was bitten by a snake, and when he drew his sword in pain, both sides mistakenly took it as a signal to resume fighting. The battle flared up again with renewed intensity. In the chaos, Arthur and Mordred finally faced each other. Their duel was fierce. Despite being father and son, there was no hesitation in their strikes. Arthur's experience clashed with Mordred's youth and ambition. In the end, Arthur drove Excalibur through Mordred's heart. But in his dying moments, Mordred struck Arthur a fatal blow to the head. The two fell together. The battle was over, but there was no victor. Both sides were decimated. The plains of Camlann were strewn with the bodies of knights and soldiers. Most of Britain's finest knights perished in the battle. Arthur lay mortally wounded on the battlefield. His loyal knight, Bedivere, found him and carried him to safety. With his last strength, Arthur ordered Bedivere to return Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake. The Battle of Camlann was remembered as Britain's last great battle. With it, Arthur's reign and the age of chivalry came to an end. The once glorious dream of Camelot had faded into history. The Battle of Camlann left deep scars on Britain's culture and spirit. The collective trauma of the people shaped the literature and art of future generations, influencing their understanding of heroism and tragedy. Natural phenomena also played a significant role in the battle. Sudden storms and lightning were seen as divine interventions, shaping the outcome of the fight, and later interpreted as acts of the gods. Survivors' accounts of the battle became crucial to the legend of Arthur. Their testimonies, passed down through generations, formed the foundation of the Arthurian mythos, with different regions adding their own interpretations. The battle also sparked a revolution in military strategy. The limitations of traditional knightly warfare became evident, leading to changes in how battles were fought in future generations. Finally, the battle transformed Britain's political landscape. With the fall of central authority, local powers declared independence, beginning a long period of division and conflict. After the battle, the gravely injured Arthur was carried to the shore by Bedivere. Sensing his time was near, Arthur instructed Bedivere to throw Excalibur into the lake. At first, Bedivere hesitated, but eventually he followed Arthur's order. As he threw the sword, a hand emerged from the water, catching Excalibur and pulling it beneath the surface. The Lady of the Lake had reclaimed the sword. Arthur knew his time had come. He bid farewell to Bedivere. At that moment, a boat emerged from the mist, carrying 3 women. One of them was Arthur's half-sister, Morgan Le Fay. Morgan and the other 2 women placed Arthur in the boat. They told him they were taking him to Avalon to heal his wounds. As the boat drifted away, Arthur shed a tear, knowing he was leaving Britain for the last time. Before disappearing into the mist, Arthur left one final prophecy. He promised to return in Britain's greatest hour of need. This prophecy would later become the legend of the once and future king. Arthur's death or disappearance plunged Britain into chaos. The kingdom fragmented into smaller realms, and foreign invaders took advantage of the instability. The glory of Camelot became a distant memory. But Arthur's story did not end. His courage, wisdom, and ideals continued to inspire future generations. Minstrels sang of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and their tales became immortal. Arthur's legend grew beyond a mere story. It became an ideal. as a symbol of justice, equality, courage, and wisdom. The story of King Arthur endured through the ages, offering hope and inspiration to those who needed it. Arthur's journey to Avalon remained a mystery. Some believed he had truly died, while others held on to the hope that he would return. This ambiguity only strengthened the power of his legend. Though Arthur's tale had ended, it also marked a new beginning. His legend transcended time and space, continuing to inspire humanity. Arthur might have disappeared physically, but his spirit lives on eternally. Arthur's journey to Avalon sparked many interpretations. Some scholars linked it to the Celtic concept of the afterlife, while Christian thinkers saw it as a symbol of resurrection. These diverse interpretations helped make Arthur's legend a universal story. In the aftermath of Arthur's disappearance, there were efforts to preserve his legacy. Some knights and nobles claimed to be his successors, vowing to continue his ideals. This led to further political conflicts, but it also kept Arthur's ideals alive. As time passed, Arthur's story was transformed and expanded. New elements were added according to the needs of each era and region. This constant reinterpretation and reinvention allowed the Arthurian legend to survive through medieval romances, Renaissance moral plays, and modern fantasy novels. Arthur's disappearance had a profound impact on Britain's national identity. The belief that Arthur would return provided hope and comfort in times of national crisis, playing a crucial role in shaping Britain's identity. Finally, the Arthurian legend has been reinterpreted in modern times as a universal human story. The struggle to achieve ideals, despite the limitations of reality, and the enduring hope despite adversity, resonate across cultures and time, making Arthur's story a global narrative.